A werewolf shifter romance written by Catherine Stewart. Prologue. The scent of pine and damp earth used to fill my lungs, a promise of the hunt, of the wild power that coursed through me. My howl, it was the blood of the pack, the heartbeat of our land. And then silence, a silence that clawed deeper than any physical wound. The wind whistled through the ancient trees, a low, mournful sound that seemed to carry the weight of what was lost. They say the land feels its alpha, that the very trees weep when a leader falls. That night, the oldest redwood in our sacred grove, a giant that had stood for centuries, its bark thick with the stories of our ancestors, it began to die. Just like that. From the crown down, its vibrant green turned brittle brown. A bad omen, the elders whispered. A sign of imbalance. They didn't know the half of it. They didn't know the fragile human who would walk into my shattered world, a woman whose very being held the key to a connection I never saw coming, a connection that could save me or destroy us both. And looking back, with the cold certainty of a broken wolf, I should have known the price of such a bond would be paid in her very life. He hadn't known her name then, hadn't seen the fragile curve of her spine as she'd knelt by the fallen tree. Her human sent a delicate whisper in the ancient woods. But even broken, even with the cold dread of the pack's uncertainty a constant weight on his soul, something within him had stirred. A recognition, primal and undeniable, like the first beat of a long-dormant heart. And the way the moonlight had caught in the strands of her hair, like spun silver, it had been the first sliver of beauty in the crushing darkness that had become his world. The memory still clawed at him, a phantom limb aching with a life that was no longer his. He could almost feel the spring in his muscles, the wind whipping past his face as he led the hunt, the exhilarating rush of the chase culminating in the satisfying weight of prey. His howl, the alpha's call, had been a song of dominance, a reassurance to his pack. Now, the silence in his chambers was a deafening testament to his fall. The only sounds were the slow, deliberate turns of the wheels beneath his hands, a constant, grating reminder of his confinement. Another rotation, Dominic, Kai's voice, usually filled with respect, now held a carefully neutral tone. His beta stood in the doorway, his broad shoulders filling the frame, a silent question in his steady gaze. Dominic's jaw tightened. I am aware of my limitations, Kai. The words tasted like ash in his mouth. The borders have been restless, Kai continued, his gaze drifting towards the window, towards the untamed forest that Dominic could no longer patrol. There are whispers, whispers of a crippled alpha? Dominic's voice was sharper than he intended. Kai's eyes met his, a flicker of concern within their depths. Whispers of vulnerability, Dominic. The pack, they look to you for strength. Dominic pushed the wheels harder, turning away from Kai's gaze. And they see this? He gestured to his useless legs, the movement sharp with self-loathing. Kai stepped further into the room, his usual stoicism cracking slightly. They see a leader who has fallen, but they also remember the alpha who stood tall. They need to see that fire again, Dominic. The fire is banked, Kai, Dominic said, his voice low. And the bellows, they no longer work. The scent that drifted into his chambers was foreign, delicate. Not the earthy musk of the pack, not the sharp tang of the forest. It was lighter, sweeter, like wildflowers after a spring rain. Then she appeared in the doorway, a small, slender figure carrying a bag that looked too heavy for her frame. Alpha Dominic? Her voice was soft, hesitant, but held a core of quiet determination. I'm Faye. I'm here to assist with your rehabilitation. He studied her, his wolf instinctively wary of the unfamiliar. Her eyes, the color of warm honey, held a directness that surprised him. There was no pity in them, only a focused intent. Assist? He echoed, his tone laced with skepticism. You think your human methods can mend what the mountain has broken? Faye met his gaze unflinchingly. I believe in the body's ability to heal, Alpha, with dedication and Perhaps a different approach. Different, he scoffed. I've had the Pax healer tending to me for weeks. Poultices and ancient chants. They haven't exactly restored my ability to outrun shadows. A small, almost imperceptible frown touched Faye's brow. Perhaps the body needs more than just tradition, Alpha. And you think you can provide that? He challenged, his voice edged with bitterness. I can offer my knowledge and my commitment, she replied, her voice steady. Whether it's enough, that remains to be seen. The full moon painted silver streaks across his chamber floor. A restless energy coiled within him, a familiar ache that now brought a fresh wave of frustration. The urge to shift, usually a powerful, exhilarating release, was now a torment, a reminder of his body's betrayal. He clenched his jaw, fighting the tremors that ran through him, the phantom sensation of fur bristling beneath his skin. Faye, oblivious to the battle raging within him, moved quietly about the room, adjusting his blankets. Are you comfortable, Alpha? You seem restless tonight. The moon affects sleep, he bit out, his voice rougher than he intended. Her brow furrowed with concern. Perhaps some warm milk? Or a calming tea? Human remedies, he scoffed, the edge in his voice a warning. They have no power here. A flicker of hurt crossed her features. I only want to help. You can't, he said, his voice low and strained. There are things you don't understand. Later, as the moon climbed higher, the pressure within him became unbearable. He gripped the armrests of his chair, his knuckles white, his breath coming in ragged gasps. A low growl, primal and involuntary, rumbled in his chest. Faye froze, her eyes widening with a sudden, dawning unease as she looked at him, a flicker of something wild and unfamiliar in his golden gaze. Days bled into weeks, the uneasy truce between Alpha and caregiver slowly evolving into something else. A grudging respect, a shared silence that held less tension. But the Pack's anxiety remained a constant undercurrent. He's not the same, Lyra, Kai's voice, low and worried, drifted from the shadows outside Dominic's open window. Lyra, a fierce warrior and one of Dominic's most trusted trackers, replied, her tone equally troubled. His spirit is dimmed, Kai. The fire, it's barely a flicker. The borders grow more dangerous with each passing moon. The rogues are testing us, Kai said, his voice hardening. They smell weakness. And the omen, the withered tree, it speaks of a broken line. Don't speak such words, Lyra warned, her voice hushed. He is still our Alpha. For how long? Kai's question hung heavy in the night air. Tradition is clear. A leader must be strong. Strength is not only in muscle and claw, Kai, Lyra argued, a hint of defiance in her tone. Dominic's mind is still sharp. His strategy cannot outrun a rogue pack, Kai countered, his voice grim, or defend the vulnerable. Their words, sharp as claws, tore at Dominic's already wounded pride. He was a shadow of his former self, a king on a broken throne. And the woman who now moved with a quiet grace through his chambers, the fragile human who looked at him with an unwavering belief, she was a constant reminder of everything he had lost and everything he could no longer protect. Yet, beneath the resentment, a strange, unfamiliar protectiveness had begun to bloom, a fierce, possessive instinct that had nothing to do with his role as Alpha and everything to do with the captivating vulnerability of the woman who now held a piece of his broken world in her gentle hands. And looking back, he would realize that those first stirrings of protectiveness were the first tendrils of a bond that would define not only tradition, but the very laws of their beings.
Even as the primal sound faded, a tremor ran through her, a chilling echo of the raw power she'd glimpsed in Dominic's eyes. It wasn't just pain she'd seen there, not just frustration. It was something ancient, something untamed. And for a fleeting moment, a sliver of something equally untamed had stirred within her own chest, a flicker of fear mingled with a strange, unsettling curiosity. What was he hiding? What darkness flickered beneath the surface of the proud, injured Alpha? That question, sharp and insistent, was a hook that snagged in her mind, refusing to let go. It whispered of secrets and a world far beyond the realm of human understanding, a world she was now undeniably a part of, tethered to it by the wounded, enigmatic man who lay just a few feet away. The memory of that growl, that flash of gold in his eyes, clung to her like the lingering scent of a storm. It had been more than just a reaction to pain, she knew it. There had been an otherness to it, a primal intensity that had sent a shiver down her spine, a shiver that had nothing to do with the cool night air seeping through the ancient stone walls of his chambers. Yet, the next morning, Dominic was his usual gruff, withdrawn self, the unsettling moments seemingly forgotten, or perhaps deliberately buried beneath layers of his wounded pride. A fortress he seemed determined to maintain against any form of genuine connection. Another set of stretches, Alpha, she said, her voice carefully neutral as she adjusted the soft supports beneath his still, powerful legs. The muscles there, even in their inactivity, held a coiled strength, a silent testament to the vibrant life he had once known, a life now tragically curtailed. He grunted in response, his gaze, as always in the early hours, fixed on the distant, sun-dappled forest visible through the arched window. The emerald canopy swayed gently in the morning breeze, a siren's call to a creature who could no longer answer. Pointless, he muttered, the word laced with his familiar bitterness, a constant undercurrent to his every interaction. It was a shield, she suspected, a way to keep the world, and her, at arm's length. Progress takes time, she countered gently, meeting his intense gaze. Those blue eyes, the color of a stormy sea, held so much pain, so much tightly leashed fury. Even the smallest movements are victories, Alpha. Tiny steps on a long road. His blue eyes, so intense and often guarded, flickered to hers a hint of something unreadable within their depths. It was a fleeting glimpse, like a shadow passing over a deep pool, leaving her wondering what lay beneath the surface. You are persistent human. The word human always carried a subtle weight when he spoke it, a demarcation, a reminder of the vast chasm that lay between their worlds, a chasm she was only beginning to perceive. A small smile, a genuine curve of her lips that held a warmth she hoped reached him, touched her own. Someone has to be, Alpha. Someone has to hold on to the hope when it feels like everything is lost. That small exchange, that fleeting moment of shared understanding in the face of his despair, was the first crack, however hairline, in the formidable wall he had built around himself. It was a tiny glimmer of connection in the vast darkness of his pain and her own growing unease, a fragile thread woven between two vastly different souls. The days that followed settled into a rhythm of exercises, quiet observations, and the unspoken tension that lingered between them like the heavy air before a storm. Faye found herself watching him more closely, her medical training now overlaid with a growing sense of something else. It wasn't just professional interest, the detached concern of a caregiver. It was a burgeoning curiosity about the man beneath the gruff exterior, the man who sometimes let slip a word, a glance, that hinted at a depth she couldn't quite fathom, a wildness that both intrigued and slightly unsettled her. One afternoon, as she read to him from a worn volume of local folklore, a request he had surprisingly made, his usual dismissiveness momentarily forgotten, a particular passage about the ancient spirits of the forest caught his attention. His usual restless energy, the barely contained frustration that seemed to vibrate beneath his skin, seemed to still. His gaze, sharp and focused, remained intently on her face as she spoke of creatures that shifted between worlds, beings both man and beast, their existence blurring the lines of reality. "Do you believe in such things, human?" he asked, his voice low, almost a whisper, the question laced with an intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. It was more than idle curiosity. It was a seeking, a probing of her very beliefs. Faye paused, considering his question carefully, the weight of his gaze a tangible thing. The air in the room seemed to thicken, charged with an unspoken energy. "I believe there are forces in nature we don't fully understand, Alpha. Energies, connections, things that science can't yet explain." His gaze held hers, a strange intensity in its depths, as if he were searching for something within her eyes, a confirmation of a truth he held close. Connections that bind, even across the impossible? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken meaning, a silent acknowledgement of the strange undercurrent that flowed between them. It was a question that resonated with the unsettling feeling she had carried since that night of the full moon, a feeling that the world around them held secrets far deeper, far more ancient than anything she could have ever imagined. Secrets that might very well be embodied in the proud, injured man before her. And deep down, a part of her, a nascent instinct she couldn't quite name, longed to understand it, to bridge that unknown chasm that stretched between their vastly different existences.
The scent of her lingering in his chambers was a dangerous thing. It was a delicate sweetness that tangled with the primal musk of his own being, a constant, subtle reminder of the fragile human who had somehow managed to breach the fortress around his wounded heart. And the memory of her soft voice, recounting her brother's struggles, had been an unexpected key, unlocking a sliver of empathy he hadn't thought himself capable of feeling anymore. But even as that fragile connection deepened, a darker instinct stirred within him, a possessive urge that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with the undeniable pull of a force he had long tried to ignore. The days that followed were a delicate dance, a tentative exploration of the fragile bridge that had formed between them. He found himself watching her, not with the guarded suspicion of an alpha assessing a potential threat, but with a fascination. The way her brow furrowed in concentration as she focused on his exercises, the gentle determination in her touch, the quiet strength that seemed to emanate from her despite her own unspoken burdens. It was a subtle allure, a siren song to the wounded beast within him. "Just a little further, Alpha," she'd say, her voice soft but firm, her hands warm against his unresponsive flesh. And for a fleeting moment, the bitterness would recede, replaced by a strange sense of anticipation. It was unsettling, this unfamiliar stirring, this unexpected pull towards a human who should have been nothing more than a temporary fixture in his isolated world. He found himself seeking her company, his gruff requests for her presence subtly shifting into something more. He'd ask her about her day, her life before she'd arrived in their isolated territory. His questions clipped and seemingly disinterested, yet his gaze would remain fixed on her face, searching for what? He wasn't entirely sure himself. Perhaps a glimpse into the world she represented, a world of normalcy and human connection that felt both alien and strangely appealing in his current fractured existence. "The forest, it's different here, isn't it?" she'd remarked one evening, her gaze drifting towards the darkening woods visible from his window. "Dangerous," he'd replied curtly, the word a reflex, a warning. "But also alive," she'd countered softly, a hint of wonder in her voice. "There's an energy here, something ancient." And in that moment, their gazes would meet, a silent acknowledgement of the unseen forces that surrounded them, the wildness that pulsed beneath the surface of their seemingly ordinary interactions. It was a shared awareness, a subtle understanding that transcended the boundaries of their different worlds. But beneath this burgeoning connection, a darker current flowed within him. The full moon nights were a torment, not just a reminder of his lost physical prowess, but a brutal awakening of instincts he had long suppressed around humans. The scent of Faye, so delicate and alluring, became a potent trigger, arousing a possessive urge that was both terrifying and undeniable. The primal part of him, the wolf that still yearned to run free, recognized something vital in her, a connection that went beyond simple companionship. It was a claiming instinct, fierce and possessive, an urge to mark her as his own, to shield her from any perceived threat, even if that threat was his own untamed nature. He found himself watching her interactions with the pack, a subtle tension coiling within him whenever another wolf lingered too long in her presence, their scents mingling with hers. It was irrational, this possessiveness, this burgeoning jealousy towards those who shared her space, but it was a primal undercurrent he struggled to control. One afternoon, Kai had engaged Faye in a lengthy conversation about a particular herb she was using in Dominic's poultices, his tone respectful, but his gaze lingering on her for a moment longer than necessary. A low growl had rumbled in Dominic's chest, a sound so subtle even Kai hadn't noticed, but Faye's honeyed eyes had flickered to his, a hint of surprise, perhaps even a flicker of understanding. It was unsettling, this unspoken awareness that seemed to be growing between them, a silent acknowledgement of the complex and increasingly volatile emotions that simmered beneath the surface of their daily interactions. The pursuit was a shadowed one, driven by instincts he barely understood, a primal claiming warring with the fragile beginnings of something akin to affection. It was a dangerous game he was playing, drawing this unsuspecting human closer while the beast within him paced restlessly, its eyes fixed on the delicate prey that had unknowingly wandered into its territory. And with every shared glance, every whispered word, the line between caregiver and something far more dangerous began to blur, a dangerous precipice upon which their fragile connection teetered precariously. The wolf within him knew, with a certainty that resonated deep in his bones, that this human was different, that she was his. And that realization, both intoxicating and terrifying, was a hunger that threatened to consume them both. The intensity of that possessive instinct surprised even him. It was a primal surge, unbidden and fierce, coloring his every interaction with Faye. When she spoke with Kai about the healing properties of willow bark, Dominic found his gaze fixed on the way Kai's hand gestured near her arm, a low growl rumbling deep in his chest, a sound so subtle it barely registered even to his own heightened senses. Yet, the feeling lingered, a territorial possessiveness that was both unsettling and undeniably potent. He wanted her near, within his sight, her delicate scent a constant reassurance in his shadowed world. "The poultice seems to be helping with the inflammation," Faye said one afternoon, her brow furrowed in concentration as she gently applied the warm mixture to his injured leg. Her touch, though purely clinical, sent a strange current through him, a warmth that had nothing to do with the poultice itself. "It dulls the ache," he conceded, his gaze fixed on the intricate patterns her fingers made against his skin. He wanted to reach out, to capture her hand, to feel the delicate bones beneath his own calloused ones, but the fear of the beast within held him captive. "Good," she replied, her voice soft, her attention fully on her task. "We'll try a slightly different blend tomorrow." Lyra mentioned a root that grows near the northern ridge. The mention of Lyra's name, the image of her lithe form moving through the forest alongside Faye, sparked that familiar possessive flicker within him. It was irrational, he knew. Faye was his caregiver, nothing more. Yet, the primal part of him, the wolf that recognized a connection his human mind struggled to comprehend, bristled at the thought of another's presence in her orbit. "Lyra has no need to involve herself in your duties," he said, his voice sharper than intended. Faye's head tilted, her honeyed eyes meeting his with a hint of surprise. She was only offering her knowledge of the local flora, Alpha. She thought it might be beneficial. "My care is my concern," he countered, the possessive growl now a tangible tension in the air between them. He saw the flicker of something in her eyes then, a question, a flicker of understanding of the undercurrents that flowed beneath his gruff exterior. It was unsettling, this growing awareness between them, this unspoken acknowledgement of the complex emotions that simmered beneath the surface of their daily interactions. The pursuit was becoming more intense, more demanding. The wolf within him paced restlessly, its senses heightened whenever Faye was near, her scent a constant lure. He found himself listening for her footsteps, watching her movements, a silent guardian drawn to her fragile light in his shadowed world. It was a dangerous path he was treading, allowing this human to get closer, allowing this unfamiliar emotion to take root. Because deep down, a terrifying certainty was beginning to bloom. This wasn't just protectiveness. This was something far more primal, far more consuming. And the wolf within him knew, with a certainty that resonated deep in his bones, that Faye was more than just his caregiver. She was something more, a truth he both craved and desperately feared.
That feeling, the unsettling prickle on the back of her neck, had become a constant companion in the shadowed woods. It was more than just the awareness of being in unfamiliar territory. It was a deep, instinctive knowing that she was being observed, studied, by eyes that held a power and an intensity she couldn't fully comprehend. Dominic. Even when his physical presence was absent, his gaze seemed to linger, a phantom touch on her skin, a silent claim in the rustling leaves. The days that followed were a delicate dance around unspoken truths. The fragile connection she felt with Dominic, that unexpected glimmer of understanding that had pierced through his pain and her initial apprehension, was now tangled with a growing unease. There was a possessiveness in his gaze when she spoke with other pack members, a subtle tightening of his jaw when Kai lingered too long near her during their discussions about border patrols. It was a possessiveness that both intrigued and slightly frightened her, a primal undercurrent that spoke of a world far removed from the gentle care she offered. "The swelling in your ankle seems to have subsided," she noted one morning, her fingers gently probing the area Dominic indicated. "It is manageable," he replied, his gaze fixed not on her hands, but on the way a stray strand of her hair had fallen across her cheek. "Good," she said, meeting his intense stare. There was a heat in his eyes, a flicker of something that went beyond gratitude, something that made her own pulse quicken in a way that was both unsettling and undeniably compelling. "We can try a few more weight-bearing exercises today, if you feel up to it." A low rumble resonated in his chest, a sound that vibrated through the very air between them. "My strength, it is returning in other ways, human." His gaze dropped to her lips, a silent, potent message that made her breath catch in her throat. The air in his chambers often felt thick with unspoken desires, a tangible tension that crackled between them like static electricity. It was a pull, a magnetic force that drew her closer even as a primal instinct screamed for caution. There was a wildness in him, a raw, untamed power that she had only glimpsed that night of the full moon, but she felt its presence constantly, a shadow lurking just beneath the surface of his controlled demeanor. One evening, as she sat by the fire, mending a tear in her jacket, Dominic's voice, low and husky, broke the comfortable silence. "Tell me of human courtship rituals, Faye." She looked up, surprised by the unexpected question. "Courtship? Well, it varies. Flowers, perhaps." shared meals, getting to know each other, talking. His brow furrowed, his intense blue eyes studying her intently. Talking? That is all. A small smile touched her lips. There can be physical affection, eventually. A touch of the hand, a kiss. His gaze darkened, a possessive heat flaring within its depths. A kiss. Is it significant? The question was loaded, the air suddenly charged with an unspoken awareness of the forbidden territory they were treading. Her own heart began to pound against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. It can be, Alpha, a sign of intimacy, connection. His gaze lingered on her lips again, a silent, potent invitation that made her skin prickle with a mixture of fear and a dizzying, undeniable longing. It was a look that promised a world beyond gentle care, a world filled with a primal intensity that mirrored the wildness she sensed within him. But the memory of that guttural growl, that flash of gold, served as a stark reminder of the chasm that lay between them, the dangerous secret he guarded so fiercely. What was he truly? What lay hidden beneath the surface of the proud, injured Alpha? The questions swirled in her mind, a tangled web of curiosity and a growing, unsettling suspicion. One afternoon, while exploring the edges of the pack's territory during her free time, a flash of white caught her eye in the dense undergrowth. Her breath hitched in her throat as she recognized the impossibly large white wolf she had encountered that first terrifying night. It watched her from the shadows, its icy blue eyes holding an unnerving intelligence, a silent communication that sent a shiver of something akin to recognition down her spine. But then, as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone, melting back into the trees as if it had been a figment of her imagination. The encounter left her deeply unsettled, a sense of being watched, of being known, intensifying. It was a feeling that intertwined with her growing awareness of Dominic's hidden intensity, a feeling that the world around her was far more complex, far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. And deep down, a terrifying suspicion began to take root. What if the proud, wounded Alpha and the mysterious white wolf were not separate entities at all? What if they were two sides of the same, impossibly alluring, and potentially dangerous coin? The thought sent a tremor of both fear and a strange, undeniable thrill through her. The web of her connection to Dominic was becoming increasingly tangled, the threads woven with unspoken desires, hidden secrets, and the chilling possibility of a truth that would shatter her understanding of everything she thought she knew. And looking back, she would realize that the subtle shifts in his gaze, the possessive undercurrents, the fleeting glimpses of something wild, they had all been breadcrumbs leading her down a path from which there might be no return. That unsettling encounter in the woods clung to her, a persistent whisper of the uncanny. The image of those piercing blue eyes, so intelligent, so knowing, mirrored the intensity she often saw in Dominic's gaze. It was a connection her logical mind fought to dismiss, yet her instincts screamed otherwise. The air around Dominic, too, often felt charged, especially during the late hours of the night, a subtle vibration that resonated deep within her bones, a feeling akin to the moments before a lightning strike. "Are you experiencing any discomfort, Alpha?" she asked one evening, noticing the subtle tension in his shoulders, the almost imperceptible clenching of his jaw. "A phantom ache," he replied, his gaze fixed on the swirling patterns in the fire. But she sensed it was more than just physical pain. There was a restlessness about him, an almost caged energy that seemed to emanate from his very being. "Perhaps a slightly warmer compress," she offered, reaching for the kettle. He shook his head, his gaze flicking to her, a strange intensity in its depths. It is not something physical, human. The way he said human then, it wasn't a simple descriptor. It held a weight, a separation, a reminder of the fundamental differences between them. The questions continued to build, brick by painstaking brick, forming a wall of unsettling possibilities in her mind. The local folklore, Dominic's strange reactions, the impossible wolf in the woods, the charged atmosphere, they were pieces of a puzzle she couldn't yet assemble, but the edges were beginning to align in a way that both terrified and intrigued her. One afternoon, while assisting him with a particularly strenuous exercise, their hands brushed. A jolt, unexpected and potent, shot up her arm. It wasn't unpleasant, not exactly, but it was more. A sudden awareness, a visceral connection that went beyond the simple touch of skin against skin. Dominic's eyes widened almost imperceptibly, a flicker of something akin to recognition, or perhaps surprise, in their depths before he quickly masked it with his usual guarded expression. But the moment lingered for Faye, a strange echo of that unsettling connection resonating within her. "Are you all right, Faye?" he asked, his voice a low rumble, his gaze intently on her face. "Yes, fine," she managed, her own pulse quickening. But the lie felt flimsy, even to her own ears. Something had shifted in that brief contact, an invisible thread drawn taut between them. Later that evening, unable to shake the unsettling feeling, she found herself drawn to the window, gazing out at the moonlit forest. The shadows seemed to dance and writhe, taking on unfamiliar shapes. A low howl echoed in the distance, a mournful sound that resonated deep within her, stirring something primal and unfamiliar. It wasn't just the sound of a wild animal, it felt like a call. And for a fleeting, insane moment, she wondered if the proud, injured man confined to his chambers felt that same pull, that same yearning for the wild. The line between patient and something more was blurring with each passing day, each shared glance, each accidental touch. There was a dangerous allure in the mystery that surrounded Dominic, a captivating pull towards the darkness that flickered beneath his controlled surface. And despite the growing unease, despite the instinctive warnings that whispered in the back of her mind, a part of her, a foolishly brave and undeniably curious part, couldn't help but lean closer to the flame. The tangled web of their connection was tightening, and she had the unsettling feeling that she was about to discover just how intricate and how potentially dangerous its threads truly were.
The weight of his secret had become a crushing burden, heavier than any stone that had pinned him that fateful night. Every shared glance with Faye, every moment of unexpected connection, was now tainted with a gnawing guilt, a terrifying awareness of the potential danger his very being posed to her fragile human existence. The memory of that jolt, that visceral connection when their hands had brushed, had been a stark reminder of the unseen energies that flowed between them, energies that soothed him yet seemed to subtly dim the light within her. He was a predator in disguise, a beast masquerading as a helpless invalid, and the woman who had so selflessly offered her care was unknowingly walking into his shadowed world, a world that could very well consume her. The full moon loomed large in the inky sky, its silvery light casting long, distorted shadows across his chamber walls. A familiar restlessness stirred within him, the agonizing pull of the shift, but this time it was laced with a desperate urgency, a primal need to understand the invisible threads that bound him to Faye, threads that now felt like a silken noose tightening around her delicate throat. "Are you feeling all right, Alpha?" Faye's voice, soft with concern, broke through his tormented thoughts. She stood in the doorway, her silhouette fragile against the dim light of the hallway. He could smell the faint floral notes of her soap, a delicate human scent that both soothed and agitated the beast within him. "The moon, it stirs old aches," he replied, his voice rough, the lie a bitter taste on his tongue. Her brow furrowed. Perhaps a stronger pain reliever? He shook his head, turning away from her concerned gaze. No human concoction can ease this. The truth of his words was a sharp irony, a cruel twist of fate that bound them together in a dangerous, unforeseen way. The pressure within him intensified, a frantic energy building behind his clenched jaw. He could feel the subtle changes beginning, the lengthening of his canines, the tightening of his muscles, a phantom sensation of fur prickling beneath his skin. He had to get her away. He had to protect her from the storm that raged within him, a storm that her very presence seemed to both quell and amplify. "Faye," he said, his voice strained, the effort to control the shift a tangible thing. You should go to your quarters. Tonight will be difficult." A flicker of something, fear, perhaps, but also a stubborn refusal, crossed her features. "I'm here to care for you, Alpha. If you're in pain." "It is not pain you can soothe," he interrupted, the words clipped, urgent. "Please, Faye, for your own safety." His frantic tone, the raw urgency in his eyes, finally seemed to penetrate her concern. A shadow of unease crossed her face. "What is it, Alpha? What's happening?" He couldn't hold it back any longer. The truth, a dark, festering secret, clawed its way to the surface. He looked at her, this fragile human who had unknowingly become so vital to his broken existence, and the words, torn from his very soul, were a desperate plea, a terrifying confession. "Faye, I am not entirely human." The silence that followed was thick, heavy, pregnant with unspoken terror and dawning comprehension. Her honeyed eyes widened, reflecting the flickering candlelight, searching his face for any sign of deception, any hint of a cruel jest. But the raw agony in his gaze, the desperate plea for understanding, held a truth that chilled her to the bone. What do you mean?" Her voice was barely a whisper, fragile as spun glass. He took a shuddering breath, the air catching in his throat. The shift was becoming harder to control, the beast within demanding release. He had to make her understand before it was too late. The stories, the folklore you read, the creatures that shift between worlds. He swallowed hard, the words like shards of glass. "They are not just stories, Faye. They are real. And I am one of them." The truth hung in the air between them, a chasm opening in the familiar reality she had inhabited. Her face paled, her eyes wide with a dawning horror, but beneath the fear, he saw a flicker of something else, a strange, unsettling recognition that mirrored the primal pull he had felt towards her from the very beginning. The pieces were beginning to fall into place for her, the strange occurrences, his heightened senses, that fleeting glimpse of something wild that night of the full moon. Before she could speak, a low growl, guttural and undeniably animalistic, tore from his throat, the sound echoing in the confines of his chambers. The subtle changes were no longer subtle. His hands clenched, his fingernails elongating into sharp claws, his spine arching against the support of his chair as the shift began to take hold, the beast within finally demanding its due. And in that moment, as the last vestiges of his carefully constructed human facade crumbled, he saw the raw, untamed fear in Faye's eyes, a fear that mirrored the terror in his own heart, the terrifying realization that the very essence of who he was could very well destroy the woman he was beginning to crave, the fragile human who had unknowingly stumbled into the heart of his shadowed world. The unveiling had begun, and the consequences, they would be devastating. The change was agonizing, a tearing, reshaping of bone and muscle that even his paralyzed lower body seemed to echo with phantom pain. His breath came in ragged gasps, each inhale drawing in the scent of Faye, a delicate fragrance now overlaid with the sharp, metallic tang of his own rising adrenaline. He saw her recoil, her hands flying to her mouth, her honeyed eyes wide with a terror that pierced him to his very core. This was it. The trust, the fragile connection they had begun to build, shattering before his very eyes. "Stay back," he rasped, his voice already deepening, becoming guttural, less human. He strained against the restraints of his chair, a desperate, futile effort to put distance between them, between the beast he was becoming and the fragile human he instinctively wanted to protect, even as his primal urges screamed to claim her. But Faye, despite the obvious fear that gripped her, didn't flee. Instead, her gaze, though wide with alarm, held a strange sort of fascination. It was as if, amidst the terror, a sliver of that earlier curiosity, that unsettling pull towards the unknown, still lingered. "Dominic?" Her voice trembled, barely a whisper, laced with disbelief and a dawning comprehension. It wasn't a question of denial, he realized, but a plea for understanding, a desperate attempt to reconcile the gentle caregiver she knew with the monstrous transformation unfolding before her. He couldn't answer. The shift was taking over, the human words becoming garbled, replaced by guttural sounds that echoed the growing beast within. His vision blurred, his senses sharpening, the scent of Faye becoming almost overwhelming, a potent mix of fear and something else. Something that resonated deep within his primal core, a delicate sweetness that called to the possessive instincts he had fought so hard to suppress. Then, the change reached his hands fully. The elongated claws, sharp and deadly, scraped against the metal of the chair's armrests. He saw Faye flinch, a small, involuntary movement, but still she remained, her gaze fixed on him, a strange mixture of horror and something akin to awe in her eyes. What are you?" she finally whispered, the question hanging in the charged air between them. The beast within him answered, a low, rumbling growl that vibrated through the very floorboards, a sound that spoke of power, of the wild, untamed essence of who he truly was. He wanted to reach for her, to show her that beneath the monstrous exterior, the man she knew still existed, still felt the burgeoning connection that had begun to bloom between them. But the primal urges were too strong, the instincts of the wolf demanding dominance, demanding possession of the delicate creature whose scent filled his senses, whose presence had inexplicably begun to soothe the savage beast within him, even as it unknowingly triggered its awakening. And in that moment, as the last vestiges of his human control slipped away, as the wolfish muzzle elongated and the golden eyes burned with an ancient, untamed light, he knew that everything had changed. The secret was out, the fragile trust was shattered, and the path ahead, for both of them, was shrouded in a terrifying uncertainty, a dangerous dance between a human heart and a wild, untamed soul. The unveiling was complete, and the consequences were only just beginning to unfold. Even as the monstrous form took shape before her eyes, even as the golden gaze burned with an ancient, predatory light, something in the depths of those wild eyes flickered, a fleeting echo of the intense blue she had come to know. It was a desperate, silent plea, a flicker of the man trapped within the beast. And in that terrifying moment, a strange, counterintuitive instinct rose within her, a fierce refusal to succumb to the primal fear that threatened to consume her. This was Dominic, the proud, wounded man who had slowly begun to trust her, to let her glimpse the vulnerability beneath his gruff exterior. And somewhere, deep within that terrifying form, he was still fighting. The creature that stood before her was breathtakingly immense, a stark contrast to the man she had been tending. Pure power radiated from its hulking frame, the thick, corded muscles rippling beneath a coat of midnight first shot through with streaks of silver. The elongated muzzle twitched, testing the air, drawing in her scent with a possessive intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. But it was the eyes, those burning golden orbs that held a flicker of Dominic's intense gaze, that kept her rooted to the spot, a strange mixture of terror and a burgeoning, desperate hope warring within her. Dominic? Her voice was a mere whisper, swallowed by the heavy silence of the chamber. It was a question born more of a desperate plea than a genuine inquiry. The creature's head tilted, a slow, deliberate movement that mirrored a human gesture of consideration. Its massive form remained still, as if caught in an internal battle. That flicker in its eyes intensified, a fleeting spark of recognition that made her heart leap with a fragile hope. He was still in there. Somewhere. It's still you, she breathed, taking a tentative step forward, her hand outstretched instinctively, a gesture of trust offered into the heart of the wild. A low growl rumbled in the creature's chest, a sound that vibrated through the very floorboards, a warning that resonated deep within her bones. It was a sound that spoke of the raw, untamed power of the beast, a power that could crush her without a second thought. Yet, beneath the menace, she sensed a tremor, a hesitation that mirrored the internal conflict she had glimpsed in Dominic's guarded eyes. "You're scared," she whispered, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. "And maybe you're trying to protect me." It was a wild, illogical thought, a desperate grasp at the remnants of the connection she felt, but it was the only anchor she had in this terrifying reality. The creature's gaze flickered down to her outstretched hand, its massive head lowering slightly, as if in reluctant acknowledgement. The air crackled with an unseen tension, the potent energy of the transformed werewolf a palpable force in the confined space. It was a standoff, a silent battle waged between primal instinct and the lingering echoes of a human heart. Then, the creature shifted its weight, a low whine escaping its throat, a sound that held a surprising note of distress. It took a hesitant step back, putting a precious inch of distance between them. It was a small movement, almost imperceptible, but to Faye, it was a lifeline, a confirmation that the man she knew was still fighting for control. "What do you need, Dominic?" she asked, her voice trembling but firm. "What can I do?" The creature's gaze flickered to the window, to the full moon that bathed the room in its silvery light. It was a silent communication, a desperate yearning for something beyond the confines of his broken human form. "The moon, it calls to you," Faye murmured, understanding dawning within her. "It's the shift, it needs to run." A frustrated snarl tore from the creature's throat, a violent shake of its massive head. The conflict within it was a desperate struggle between the primal urge to embrace the wild and the lingering awareness of her fragile presence. "But you're scared of hurting me," she breathed, the realization hitting her with the force of a physical blow. This terrifying beast, the creature of nightmare, was fighting to protect her. Tears welled in her eyes, a mixture of terror and a profound, unexpected tenderness. This wasn't just a monster. This was Dominic, trapped within a power he couldn't fully control, a power that was intrinsically linked to her own fragile being. "I can help you," she said, her voice gaining strength, fueled by a fierce determination. "I don't know how, but I won't let you fight this alone." It was a promise whispered into the heart of the wild, a fragile vow offered to the beast that held the man she had come to care for captive. And in that moment, as the monstrous form before her let out a low, heart-wrenching groan, she knew that their connection, however dangerous and unforeseen, was about to be tested in ways she could never have imagined. The beast was unveiled, and now, the true battle for Dominic's soul, and perhaps her own life, had begun.
Sound of ragged breaths, both his and hers, mingling in the tense silence that followed the raw display of his transformed self. The scent of the wild beast still clung to the air, a potent reminder of the chasm that had just been laid bare between them. But beneath the fear in Faye's honeyed eyes, a flicker of something else had ignited, a spark of fierce protectiveness, a refusal to let the monster eclipse the man she had come to know. And in that moment, a terrifying, exhilarating thought clawed its way through his primal instincts. She's not running. The beast within him, still thrumming with the raw energy of the unveiled shift, remained coiled and tense, every instinct screaming to either claim the fragile human before him or retreat into the shadowed safety of the wild. But the unwavering gaze of Faye's honeyed eyes held him captive, a strange anchor in the storm raging within his soul. There was no revulsion there, no utter terror, but a heartbreaking blend of fear and a desperate, almost defiant, curiosity. It was as if, having finally seen the darkness he had fought so hard to conceal, she was now determined to understand it, to find the man she knew buried beneath the fur and claws. Dominic. Her voice, though still trembling, held a newfound strength, a fragile thread of courage woven into her fear. Is that really you? The guttural growl that escaped his throat was involuntary, a remnant of the beast's dominance. But he focused on her voice, on the sound of his name on her lips, a sound that now held a weight far beyond simple address. He fought to suppress the primal urges, to force the monstrous form to stillness, to let the human part of him, the part that ached with a desperate longing for her understanding, to the surface. It was an agonizing battle, a war waged within the confines of his own skin. The wolf demanded freedom, the intoxicating release of the wild hunt, the possessive claim of his chosen mate. But the memory of her gentle touch, the warmth of her smile, the quiet strength of her unwavering care, these human anchors held him fast, a fragile lifeline in the tempest of his transformation. Slowly, painstakingly, the monstrous tension in his body began to ease. The sharp claws retracted slightly, the elongated muzzle softened, the burning gold in his eyes flickering, receding, replaced by the intense, yearning blue that had become her anchor in his shadowed world. The change wasn't complete, the beast still a potent presence beneath the surface, but the human will, the desperate need to reach her, was beginning to win. Faye, his voice, when it finally came, was a raw, guttural rasp, barely recognizable as his own. It was the sound of two beings warring within one body, a testament to the brutal duality of his existence. Her breath hitched, her eyes widening further as she recognized the faint echo of his familiar voice within the monstrous sound. Hope, fragile but fierce, ignited within her. "It is you," she breathed, taking another tentative step closer, her hand still outstretched, trembling slightly but unwavering in its intent. The wolfish part of him recoiled instinctively at her approach, a low growl rumbling in his chest, a warning born of fear, fear of his own power, fear of harming the delicate human who dared to approach the beast. But the human part of him, the Dominic who had begun to crave her presence, yearned for her touch, for the reassurance that she wasn't utterly repulsed by the monster he had become. "Stay back, Faye," he rasped again, the words laced with a desperate plea. I don't know if I can." "You can," she interrupted, her voice surprisingly firm, her honeyed eyes holding his with an unwavering conviction. "I felt it, Dominic. Even then. You were fighting." Her words, spoken with such unwavering belief, struck a chord deep within him, a resonance of the fragile connection they had forged. She had seen the monster, the raw, untamed beast, and yet she hadn't fled. She saw the man beneath the fur and claws, the wounded soul yearning for connection. He lowered his massive head, a gesture of both submission and profound vulnerability. The guttural sounds subsided, replaced by ragged breaths that were slowly becoming more human. The air still thrummed with the residual energy of the shift, the scent of the wild still potent, but the terrifying transformation seemed to have stalled, held at bay by the strength of his will and the unexpected courage in her gaze. Why? Why aren't you afraid? The question tore from his throat, a raw, bewildered admission of his own monstrous nature. Faye's hand finally reached him, her small, delicate fingers brushing against the coarse fur of his transformed muzzle. The contact sent a jolt of unexpected energy through him, a strange mix of primal awareness and a startlingly tender connection. "I am afraid," she admitted, her voice still trembling slightly, but her touch remained steady. "But I also know you, Dominic. The man who reads poetry, who worries about the pack, who looks at me sometimes with something more than just alpha and caregiver." Her words, spoken with such quiet vulnerability, pierced through the remaining vestiges of the beast. The tension in his transformed body eased further, the monstrous form slowly beginning to recede, the sharp edges softening, the fur retracting, the powerful muscles reshaping themselves into the familiar contours of his human form, albeit still strained and weakened. The transformation back was always more jarring, more painful, a brutal reminder of the duality of his existence. As the last vestiges of the wolf receded, leaving him weakened and trembling in his chair, his human eyes, filled with a raw, unguarded emotion, locked with Faye's. The chasm between them, though terrifyingly revealed, hadn't become insurmountable. Instead, in the heart of the unveiled beast, a fragile, undeniable truth had emerged. Their connection, however dangerous and unforeseen, was a force far stronger than either of them had ever imagined. And in the quiet aftermath of the storm within him, the real conversation, the true reckoning of what lay between them, was finally about to begin. The unspoken truth hung heavy in the air between them, a chilling realization that their connection, the very thing that offered a fragile hope, might also be her undoing. The happily ever after she had unknowingly begun to crave felt suddenly distant, shrouded in a terrifying uncertainty. But even as the fear coiled in her stomach, a fierce determination bloomed within her. They had crossed a threshold, unveiled a truth that could shatter their worlds. Turning back was no longer an option. They had to find a way forward, a way to navigate the treacherous path that lay before them, bound not just by a fragile hope, but by a love that had taken root in the heart of the wild. And looking into Dominic's raw, vulnerable eyes, she knew, with a certainty that resonated deep within her soul, that she wouldn't face this darkness alone. Their story was far from over. In fact, it felt like it was only just beginning. The weight of his confession, the terrifying revelation of their intertwined fates, settled heavily in the small chamber. The air, still carrying the faint scent of the wild, thrummed with an unspoken understanding, a fragile bridge built across the chasm of their different worlds. But beneath the burgeoning trust, a chilling question lingered. Could their connection, born of a wounded alpha and a compassionate human, truly withstand the inherent danger it posed? "Maeve," she spoke of a way, Dominic finally said, his voice low, his gaze fixed on her hands, as if seeking an answer there. "Ancient lore, a rare bloom that thrives only in the deepest parts of the territory, under the light of the blood moon. The moon petal, it is said to absorb excess energy." Hope, fragile but persistent, flickered within Faye's chest. "Werewolf energy?" He nodded, his expression grim. "It is a perilous journey." The blood moon is but a few nights away, and the path it is guarded. Then we'll go, she said, her voice surprisingly steady, her fear momentarily eclipsed by a fierce determination. Together, Dominic's blue eyes searched hers, a mixture of disbelief and a profound tenderness within their depths. Faye, you are still weak. And the journey. And you are still injured. Dominic, she countered, her hand finding his, her touch a silent promise. But we are stronger together, aren't we? You with your knowledge of this world, and me, well, I'm stubborn. A rare, genuine smile touched his lips, a fleeting glimpse of the Alpha she had glimpsed before the fall. Stubborn is an accurate assessment, human. The days leading up to the blood moon were a flurry of quiet preparations. The pack, now aware of the truth of their Alpha's nature and the delicate balance of his connection with Faye, offered their support, their initial fear replaced by a cautious respect for the bond that had formed. Kai, his pragmatism tempered by the undeniable strength he had witnessed between them, organized a small, skilled escort for their journey. The trek to the heart of the territory was arduous. Dominic, though still confined to his modified wheelchair for much of the way, guided them with an intimate knowledge of the land, his sharp mind compensating for his physical limitations. Faye, though weakened, drew strength from his unwavering presence, her determination fueled by the fierce, undeniable love that had taken root in her heart. The blood moon rose, a crimson stain against the inky sky, casting an eerie glow over the hidden grove where the moon petal bloomed. The air thrummed with a raw, potent energy, a palpable force that made Faye's skin prickle. The flower itself was luminous, pulsating with a soft, otherworldly light. The ritual Maeve described was ancient, demanding a delicate balance and a willing sacrifice. As Dominic, with Faye's unwavering support, channeled his energy into the bloom, a visible wave of power flowed from him, drawn into the luminous petals. Faye felt a strange lightness, a subtle easing of the persistent fatigue that had plagued her. The journey back was slow but filled with a quiet hope. The moon petal, carefully preserved, pulsed with a gentle energy, a tangible representation of their intertwined fates. Dominic, though forever changed by his injury, had found a new strength in his vulnerability, a deeper connection to his pack and to the woman who had seen beyond the beast within. The final scene unfolds under the soft glow of the full moon, weeks later. Dominic, with Faye leaning against him, her hand resting over his heart, watches as the pack gathers in the clearing. The withered sacred tree, though still a reminder of their initial hardship, now has new shoots of green emerging from its base. The air is filled not with fear, but with a quiet acceptance, a dawning understanding of a new kind of strength, a strength born not of brute force, but of resilience, wisdom, and the enduring power of a love that defied the very boundaries of their different worlds. Their happily ever after wasn't the fairy tale of perfect ease, but a deeply cherished reality, forged in the heart of the wild, bound by a love that had weathered the storm and emerged, fragile yet unbreakable, into the dawn of a new beginning.